Hey, thanks for joining in. This is FAQ number 2. And we're not exactly sure what we're going to do with this, but we're going to keep the questions going. It seems that everybody enjoys it, and there's more questions than we can really answer. So we've pulled up 3 questions already, and if we've got time left, we're going to go through and just start picking some random ones, at least mention a few things. And if we keep doing this, the hopes is that we answer most everybody's question at least at some point, and we can list out points in the video where you might click to get the question answered. For right now, we're just going to wing it. We're going to get some questions going, and we're going to keep doing this. If you have suggestions for us, please let us know. Keep asking your questions, even if we don't get to every one of them. We notice the community is stepping up, answering the basic questions, and we're going to step up and answer the more detailed questions. So let's just get started. Sometimes an hour could be spent on just cracking the surface of some of these questions. And I feel like when you're new, you don't know how deep these conversations really run. But that's part of what we want to do, is be a guide point and point you in the direction. And if we can, we're going to answer it too. So let's get started. Windy City Rosin, and this is on the FAQ, the 10x10 series 6. You can see these questions there. Windy City Rosin says, it sucks that you start out the video with complete bro science about the whole better terps and flavor from soil than you would with hydroponics myth. Thumbs down. Such a controversial topic. There's way too much hype over the two. I think the hype is warranted because there's a lot of marketing dollars being spent to tell you that there are better products out there that are going to produce better quality, and products don't produce quality, practices do, and Mother Nature does, and that's what we're all trying to duplicate. So I think I'm biased in a good way, but when you look at hydroponics, one of the challenges is that you're in control, and for a beginner, that could actually be a sticking point. It could be a point where they say, hey, look at which nutrients do I use, in what quantity, how do I flush, what is too much, what is too little. Finding that out can leave you driving a car that's too fast and you just don't have enough experience, and you could hit a wall midway through a grow. And a lot of times you hear people starting a grow and not finishing. Typically with living soil, that's not the case. And so better terps usually becomes completing a very healthy grow is going to give you the best terps. And so it might be harder on your first time in hydroponics. That being said, my first grow is hydroponics, and maybe that's why I'm acutely aware of those pain points. But if you follow a proven recipe, the terps are going to be there, the quality is going to be there. It's going to be much more simple to provide every element in the soil than it is to be balancing it with pH and hydroponics. And I think most would agree with that. Where I think the bro science comes in, where he may have had some accuracy, is if you get really good at hydroponics and you involve some organics in there, and you also involve all of the different nutrients at the right time, you have a good environment, you can grow some fire. But that's not what this is about. I'm a soil grower. This extrapolates to more than that. For us, it's about independence, not dependence. If we go to a grow shop and then they close and I can't get that formula, I still want the same results. And at home, I can duplicate a lot of what we offer here. Once you get the experience, you can test all this on your own. You don't need a soil test lab. Just plant plants in it. That'll tell you if the local compost is good. Of course, I always want to go further. And we're going to talk about some books today a little bit later, because I often compare the two worlds of trusting nature, but also using science so that you don't have to wait so long to find out if what you're doing is right. And that's why these topics can get deep. Better terps come from more responsibility growing, better quality. And I feel that in living soil, much easier for the beginning grower. And the reason why I want to address that point is that when I first started, I was convinced hydro was better. Get the hydro, right? And that's going to be the best. They just want to argue about what produces the best. And it's kind of like arguing over which chef produces the best food. The thing with hydro is his technique is revered as the ultimate, the controller of all things, kind of playing God. And you picture a white lab coat and just making that, where in the soil, it's like you picture overalls and you picture like the worms doing the work, and we're more of a steward. And I think it's easier to be a steward statistically when we look at all of the different tests. We see higher terpenes coming from soil, and we see that because products will often advertise increasing terps from like 1 to 2%. But when you're producing rosin and you want it to dump and you want high terpene content, a lot of times we'll see 5 to 10% terps in living soil. Not to say you couldn't do it in hydro, but there's always exceptions to the rule. I do feel that soil's the better way, and so one of the things that I didn't want to forget about discussing is that when we're looking at mimicking nature, ultimately that's what we're trying to do. When I look at One Straw Revolution, the book, He was a scientist that started to trust nature. It took him 30 years to come fully around. And the same thing happens here when we're looking at systems and putting them in place. Oftentimes a staff will come up with an idea. Hey, let's do this. It would work better for the customer. And then oftentimes someone higher up will say, yeah, but what if this happens? And I'm like, oh, we didn't think of that. And one idea turns into 100 yes or no's and systems development just to make sure we actually encompass every answer. And answering a basic question like, are terps better in soil or hydro, is kind of a fool's errand in the sense that any science could probably paint a picture of one doing better than the other in certain circumstances. My goal is to show you in your circumstances what are going to produce the best results, and I think that's soil. That's what I built our company off of. Again, you can see we could just talk about the higher and the finer points of this all day long, and I think that's why people love cannabis, and that's why I'm answering this question. Is I like when we postulate questions that go against the norm. I don't want to argue with anybody. I'm only trying to improve as well. And if for some reason hydroponics really did prove to be the absolute best way to go, I'm convinced we could find a way to make it where it's sustainably done. And I would pursue that, but I don't. And that's not what I believe. And so that's how I'm gonna answer questions. Let's go to the next question, because I think we spent enough time on that. And if we didn't for some reason, and all you wanna talk about is some of those subjects, I'd be happy to go more into it with you guys. Next question by Trevor Gordon. Says, question for you, especially because of the shirt you're wearing in this video. I was wearing a growing organic shirt. You can see that in that video. How important is it to see a product or ingredient listed as organic in its title or certification versus a product that may not technically be listed or certified as organic despite being derived organically? Really good question. As someone who appreciates organic roots, I imagine you research the sourcing of your products you sell. But I wanted your thoughts, as I care about what I put into plants I grow, yet I know that getting the word on a product isn't the end all be all. Plus I trust all your products, yet not all your products are listed as organic. I love that. In fact, you answered part of the question, and I wrote it out on here. You have to have some trust for the people that you're working with. And in absence of that trust, these organic labels are important. They back it up. They allow people to say, is this what I think it is? Is it organic? The confusion comes from there being many different certifiers, registers, listers, and the words are important. So OMRI is often mentioned, the Organic Materials Review Institute. Well, they are a listing company. What they do is they read the National Organic Program guidelines. And if a product is allowed for organic use, it is now allowed to be on the OMRI list if you pay them money. And it simplifies things. Instead of having to go to the National Organic Guidelines, look up a brand, look up the ingredients, see if every ingredient is on the approved list, talk to your organic farm certifier and prove to him that all the ingredients are organic. OMRI will go through it with you. You'll pay them a fee and they'll put it on their list. And now any one of these people can say, it's on the list, done. So realistically what it does is it greases the wheels. It allows marketing and selling of products to be done a little bit easier. And it allows a little bit less resistance when it comes to getting certified organic on your farm. That being said, I'm with you. We have a vegetable farm, and people that communicate with us, they believe in what we do and they don't need it to say organic, so we've not done so. Everything we buy is either organic or better than. The challenge is if it's listed or certified or registered organic, and we open the bag and we mix it with something else, or even if we just pack it into a smaller bag, now we have to pay that same certifying company again. We'd have to do that on a million different SKUs just so we could put the word organic back on there. Or if we blend something, we'd have to have the whole product with every ingredient listed, certified organic. Now we're willing to do that and we have all the data to do so. But unfortunately, we're at the mercy of that and the team here, and we have a lot of products. So we have to pick and choose. We most likely will get to the point where we do some organic listing to make it easier for farmers, but it's never been important to me. It would only be important for business reasons. And so if you have the benefit of buying from someone that you trust, whether it be us or whether it be a local farmer, I feel like that relationship is more important than any certifier. That's how I feel about it. I feel like others should make their own decision, but that's how I got to BuildASoil's decision. And in the future, we'd like to be more transparent about the BuildASoil way for sourcing ingredients. Up till now, it's been whatever Jeremy says, and that's worked really well, but it's not as systematizable. We're coming up with a list of hard and fast rules that we can put new companies through its paces. So as we get busier, it's harder to look for new products, because we really care and have to try them and use them and vet them and research them and send them to the lab. So if somebody calls me and wants me to try a product, it could become a pain because now I have to spend time and money. But I don't want to avoid finding new awesome products. And that, again, to me is more important than whether it says organic on it. One last instance that I think you might find important is you can go to the gardening store, you can pick up fertilizer, and it can say organic on it, and the contents would blow you away, but they're not organically produced. They could be from feedlots, and they could be from non-organically GMO, pesticide sprayed plant material being fed to maltreated animals that then gets processed, and then it's sold as approved for organic use, so it can get all of the seals of organic approval, which is confused with being organic. So to me, it's more important to be organic. Now here's another one. Let's say you wild harvest something that is untouched by man. That's generally regarded as safe and wild harvested, but you can't list it organic unless you prove to someone that it was untouched by man and it wasn't grown in a non-organic way. Double-edged sword. I want there to be accountability, but I also want organic people that are doing things right not to have their hands tied behind their back. That becomes your relationship with them, and so it's great that you're asking these questions. We're talking about organic versus non-organic and labeling and such. So we offer a fish product. Many people use liquid fish. I believe ours is the best, and I really like it, and I could talk to you for an hour about why and how we sourced it, what fish they used, how stable it is. But in that product, they use phosphoric acid. That's what stabilizes the fish so it doesn't rot in the bottle until you dilute it. The great news is plants need phosphorus. It's food-grade phosphoric acid that they use in soda pop. It is not organic. The caveat is that to be approved for organic use, the very small amount of phosphoric acid has to be used just to stabilize said material, not to inflate the fertilizer numbers. I don't know who's going to control that, but it's obviously going to be based on a number of different factors. And that's why we also teach you how to make your own lacto-fermented fish. And who says you need fish? So this is where the arguments go, and this is where it can get weird. And that's why I believe it's way more than just a label. I don't want to tell you 100% of BuildASoil products are organic. I will say 100% of the products we carry have gone through our rigorous testing procedures, and it fits the model of what BuildASoil stands for. Where it can be considered non-organic would be splitting hairs. Like for instance, in some of the compost. What is every gram of yard waste that went into making compost? That's why we offer multiple types. And that's why we do tons of due diligence, because our customers trust us to do that. We spend countless hours doing this, but that still doesn't mean we're perfect. And so we encourage you to learn, become independent, do all of this own research on your own. What's so great about that formula is that when our customers get educated and they hold us accountable, they realize what we're walking the walk. And they even build more trust because now they're educated. They can point out where we may be wrong, and they realize that we are doing things above board. That's the best, when you're not just blindly believing me, because now we can be in a relationship that lasts a lot longer than someone else telling you the opposite and you believing them. Do your own research, and I'll be here to answer more questions in the future. So Loyalty Cannabis, aka Ty Warren, what's up Ty? Says under and overwatering living soil is a hot topic. Roughly how often does a 3x3 need watering when done by hand? Really good question. Watering is the most important part of having a garden. There's so much that's spent on watering, it's ridiculous. From farm level irrigation, sophisticated automatic setups. From a basic level of hand watering, there's some important factors to consider. Let's just jump in from a very, very base level. I'm going to refer you to a blog post that goes a little deeper. To find that, you can Google how to water and type BuildASoil. And this blog post will pop up. It says how to water living soil. It'll be linked on the video here. And I don't want to go into every detail here because a lot of it's like, well, what's your environment like? That's going to adjust your watering. Let's go over the basic principles, assuming everything's done right. I can't exactly answer your question, and it's frustrating. I practice jujitsu, and a lot of times I'll ask my coach, how do you get out of this situation? And he says, don't get into it. It's not a good answer, but as you get more experience, you realize sometimes that is the right answer. So I'll help you with how I came to these answers. Obviously, we want the soil to be in a position where it has enough water for all the biology to do its job, moisture for the plant to grow, and we want it to be perfect. But what happens when the plant drinks? Now there's too little. So ideally, we'd be dripping in there at exactly the rate that the plant is drinking. That's what like automatic watering, drippers, blue mats, so many different ways of doing it, and there's pros and cons of every one. When we're hand watering, we're trying to create this flow. And the reason why we want the flow is we don't want fungus gnats. We do want oxygen in the soil, but we don't want to underwater to the point where in an hour they need it again. Heck, we have to live a life. We'd probably like to water at most once, worst case, twice per day, depending on how our container size is. So for me, I've just learned over years of doing it wrong and doing it right what produced better results. You got to understand the basic difference is that in hydroponics or in plant available nutrients, like bottles that you buy that have guaranteed numbers, those are available nutrients. When you mix it in water, they're in a form the plant can use right away. When you're growing in soil, those nutrients are locked into the cation exchange. They're locked into, basically, they're adsorbed into the soil. To take them out of the soil, there has to be a biological interface. To do that, this chemistry, this biology, it relies on some moisture and some warmth. And without that, you're not going to get the best results. In hydroponics, of course, you don't want 110 degree water, but the availability of nutrients is not so dependent on these processes. So we've come up with some solutions to that. You hear this practice in hydro, let's say soilless, where you're growing in cocoa coir or you're growing in rock wool, something that is not just floating in water. You typically want to have dry down periods, not enough to kill the roots, but you don't want it wet at all times. And you hear this, I get it wet, and then once it's dry, I water. That's because you want to be able to feed a lot, and the nutrients have to be in the watering. So you want it to go through it very quickly. In soil, it's okay if it's moist, and we're not getting this complete dry down. The opposite, though, is that if we keep it too wet, nitrogen is highly affected, there's not enough oxygen in there, and we can lead to fungus gnat issues. We're trying to control an ecosystem that needs to be in a nice range. So what we did for a while is we would do bigger beds of soil and bigger containers. That allows you to have new, fresh roots going out further, and those are more efficient at getting nutrients, and it allows you to have a wider window of opportunity before too little water is traumatic, and too much water is now the issue with big beds. If you overwater and you've got a small plant, it can just be a disaster. So you see us mention all the time in here 5 to 10%. And so now that I went over the background, how many problems there are to this, I'm going to just give you the quick bullet points to consider for living soil. Number 1, we want to be at, let's say, a scale of 1 to 10. We don't want to go like a 4 on moisture. 1 being bone dry, 10 being soaking wet. And if we knew that 5 was perfect, we'd want to be like in that 4 to 6 range at all times. So in a small container, that might mean that you water every single day. And you water to a point where we're not really getting runoff. So that's the next point. In living soil, we don't water to the point where we flush the soil out. The reason why is we spent money building the soil, and whatever nutrients do become available, we don't want to rush out the bottom. I think that rule of thumb, you shouldn't be going a week between waterings. I don't care if you have a 30 gallon, 100 gallon, or a 1 gallon. If your plant's very small and has a lot of soil, you should be watering once every day, 2 or 3 days, but very small amounts. That way you're targeting that 4 to 6 range in the 1 to 10 scale we discussed. And it's more important in a living soil to keep the mulch layer somewhat moist where the feeder roots are going to be as you top dress. The caveat here is that if you go in there every day and kind of soak the top, it's going to lead to excessive moisture, and you can get some fungus gnat issues, and you can start to get yellowing lower leaves from excessive water, which means that they're not getting nitrogen right away. On the opposite side, if you're dry too often, you're probably going to get yellowing of the tips, what looks like fertilizer burn. It's usually not because there's a burn of fertilizer. It's because as you dry the soil out, what nutrients are soluble are left in very little water, which means it becomes potent. It could be sodium, could be something else, but that means that there's not enough water to dilute what was made available that day by the biology. So going too dry can look a little burnt. And then going too wet can look like yellowing lower leaves where it's just not getting that nitrogen because it's too wet. In between there is where all the magic happens. And to get there, we've targeted a 5 to 10% range. The amount of how often is going to depend on you. Ideally, if we went in there every single day and watered, that would mean that we had a pretty good container size against a pretty well-sized plant. It's easier to water a plant that is a good size compared to its container because it's going to drink relatively quickly. If it's a little tiny plant and a big amount of soil, you want to err on the side of caution. And if it's a small container with a big plant, you want to err on the side of too much water because it's almost impossible to overwater when it's just root bound and really going through the water fast. The exceptions to that are like high and low humidity might exacerbate those situations. Really intense light might exacerbate that. But the rule of thumb is 5% is a good common number. And because we're erring on this 4 to 6, occasionally as the plant grows bigger, we'll realize that our 5% waterings weren't quite enough. And once every week or two, we'll do a deep watering in an effort to find where that runoff occurs at. And it's safe to do as the plant's getting bigger. You want to find where's peak saturation and back off from there. That's the 10% number typically. The way to follow this is, let's say you're growing in a 10-gallon container. Typically, I'd water about a half gallon. I would come in there one day after transplanting a little clone, I'd give it a half gallon of water. The next day I would check to see if it needed any. And if it did, I would give it a very small amount, not 5%. The next day, if it needed water, I would give it 5%. And so it's like, you don't need to just go clockwork 5% every time, but it's a great number to load your water and then kind of feel weight, check where it's at and go back to. If you've gone too far, you can ramp it up to the 1 gallon and water that 10% number. And I bet you get runoff at that point. If you're getting runoff at less than 5%, it might be because you need a wetting agent. It could be that you have dry pockets and the water is just shooting straight through. And that's another important consideration. So I think I've covered the main points. Your grow room is going to be different than everyone else's, but if you follow 5 to 10%, erring towards 5%, because you can always water twice in a row, and if you do too much, you can't take it back out. Next rule of thumb is use weight, things like that, to kind of feel it out, and just be sure before you go hard on it. And then I don't want you to go 1 or 2 weeks between watering, but I think that that's enough for you to have some guidelines. All right, well, I've got more questions pulled up here, and I actually want to answer more questions, but you can see that I get a little bit detailed and time is flying by. I've got people that need my time right now, so I'm going to wrap this up, and we're going to keep doing this in the future. I'm going to, in the next episode, go over some books people have been asking about. And so if you've watched this far, all the way to the end through my rantings about these questions, then I know you're somebody who will benefit from future questions. So comment down here. Tell me which book you'd like to talk about first. And if I get enough comments knowing people watched to the end, I'll start there. Besides that, thank you again. I really appreciate you asking these questions. It gives me something really good to do, and it helps me remember what it's like to be newer and to ask these questions. And I think it really helps all of our customers and our processes here when we recognize that.